Tēnā katoa koutou, tātou katoa. Kia ora everybody, it's Jay Wilson here from Te Pai Pai Waho. And just mihi to everybody this evening and acknowledge the challenges that we're going through with coronavirus and another lockdown. Big mihi and aroha to our whānau in Auckland, Tāmaki Makaurau, as well as Taranaki. And then to all of us around the motu. Nā reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou. Just as we're getting ready to start, it's episode number 3 on Tangihanga tonight. And kia ora Auntie Wai. And this is all about taking the body home and sorting out the funeral day. And so, but I'll get into things, and I'm going to do the karakia that I composed when we were in lockdown last time. So just send all our whakaaro to each other so that the intentions for this session is all about us being strong, looking after each other around the country, around the world. Kia ora Soph, kia ora puku. Anā kia karakia tātou. Mai amaranga te rangi e tui o nei, mai amaranga te papa e takoto ake nei, mai are ki roto mai, are ki wa o euru ora, Tēnā toka te manawa ora ki te waka tipua, manawa ora ki te waka tauito, o mai te mauri ora, ko te ora i te pū, i te we, i te aka, i te tāmore, tēnei te ora ka tupu, te ora tupu, roroa te ora, rere mai te wai ora, kauru ora e ai. Hui e tāikie. Tāikie kia tātou katoa I roto I tēnei pō. So kia ora everybody, Jay Wilson here. Episode number 3 for Tangihanga. And tonight's episode will focus in on returning the body home to either the family homestead or to the marae, as well as a few tips around confirming the details for the actual funeral day. Hoi anō, just a few other points, just wrote some notes so I don't go kōtiti, so I went for a bit too long last week. E mei atu ana ki te au o te rangi I tēnei ia I pō, ko ta uarangi kei te rangi, and just the phenomenon that I saw tonight, there's a certain type of red sky that I know as tahuarangi, and that's a sign of volcanic activity around the Pacific Rim. So it'll be interesting to just check out what's been happening, whether there's been a big earthquake or an eruption either above the ocean or below the ocean over the last day or two, because that phenomenon tahuarangi was shown very clearly tonight. And I can see my sister joining in from Murray Bridge in South Australia. So happy 50th no. Big mihi to you. And also to our mokopuna manu kōrei. Kata ino ka wānau mai e te, e koro. No reira, nau mai ki te aoturoa nei. Okay, everybody, let's get into it. Number 1 episode covered an introduction to Tangihanga generally. Number 2 covered preparing the body and the other components you need to be thinking about before you go home. And then this number 3 is about taking the body home. So we're now at the undertakers or whoever's preparing your body, remembering you don't need to go to an undertaker. And so let's just say you are, though, because that's where the majority go. So you're about to leave the undertakers. And so it's normal to have a little karakia before you leave. Try not to make it too long, especially if the haukainga are waiting for you, because people have a tendency to go on and on and on. And yet there might be some who will go to the funeral parlour because they can't get to the tangi. So you might want to give them a little chance, but try not to drag it out. And then have your karakia, lift the tūpāpaku up and take the tūpāpaku to either the hearse or to the van, the vehicle, whatever you're using. Just a key note, which I covered last week as well, is that when you do put the body in, feet first. And the tikanga behind that is so that the wairua of the body or the wairua of the person, if you to stand up, you're able to just walk forward and keep walking forward rather than walking backwards. And there's a big kōrero about going backwards and going back on your path that you travel when you're taking a tūpāpaku, because this is the last form of the physical body. Even though ko takiwātia te Māori, the Māori has exited the body, this is the last part of the tinana, and so you try and recognise it and treat it like a normal tinana, even though there's all this tapu that's associated with it now. Plus, the old people would always say, kaua e rite ki te koura. Don't be like a crayfish, because crayfish walk backwards. Instead, he tangata tātou. And so you put the feet first. There will be the odd occasion when you're in a van or a car where it might not be big enough and you might have to actually turn the body around to make it fit for the vehicle. But preferably feet first. And when you travel, try to make sure that the feet aren't too upwards. So if you're in if the body's on an uneven surface, then just make sure you prop up the head of the coffin so that the tūpāpaku isn't all scrunched up when you lift the lid off. Another key point before you leave the undertaker, because you've got at least 3 or 4 hours and no real excuses to be a hoha and say, oh, I've got to stop for petrol. So get your petrol earlier, because otherwise each stop can take up to 20 minutes because it's about moving people, and moving people takes forever. So you should leave the undertakers, agree if you're going for a few hours, agree where you will stop and stick to that. And be quite firm with the tira that's with you. So come on, everybody, this is where we're going. We're not going for a lolly here, a mimi here, a smoke there. Agree to those sites and keep to them. And then, because this is all about you're now keeping to time so that you don't hold the haukainga up. Because the last thing you want to do is to upset the cooks because you decided to takamuri for a couple of hours and then all the kai's cold. Once you arrive at that place, it's always good. We've got phones these days. You never used to in the past. But it's always good to just text ahead, we're at this place, we're at that place. And if you don't have service, oh well, just got to work on keeping to time. When you arrive at the marae, you back the vehicle in to the ngutu of the marae, the waha of the marae, the waharoa, the entrance to the marae ātea. And then you follow whatever the local tikanga is, where you will be called on to the marae. You may have a hakapohiri, you may not. It's more common that they don't, but some marae do. You have a hakapoiri and whatever goes forward. And then the key thing is some marae will lay their two papaku on the ground first before lifting them up and taking them either into a whare mate, into the roro of the house, the maho, the veranda, or inside, depending on where you're from. And each tribe is different. And so you've got to work out all of the tikanga around that and just knowing. In the case of my people, we place the two papaku on the ground, on the marae itself, put a pāriki out, lay them on the ground, and somebody will either come out and rokatau them or do a karakia. Either way, it's the marae accepting the two papaku back home. And from there, the haukainga will usually take over and lift the body up to take them into the whare mate or the roro, etc. With the some marae will have the haukainga go straight out to the vehicle and bring them on. Often it's the cooks as well. And the tikanga around that is that the cooks are in the kitchen the whole time looking after the people. And so they're given that honour to carry the body on and off the marae. And once you're on, you either get taken into the whare mate, the veranda, the roro, or into the house, depending on where you're from. And then the speeches start. And as the kōrero starts, that's when you can then just relax and go, yeah, I'm home. And just really important to get the body home as soon as possible, notwithstanding there may be legal issues around coroner, etc. But once you've gone through that, don't takamuri. 3-4 hours is a long time at an undertaker's. And then get the body home. And it's at this time that some marae, once the body is on the home side, either in the whare mate, the veranda, or in the whare puni, some will start off with a karakia, some won't. Some will go straight into the mihi, to wakatau the manuhiri, to poroaki, the two papaku. And as I know it, and traditionally, though it's changed, and I don't know why it's changed, this was the time when the haukainga would have their chance to mihi the two papaku. Whereas nowadays, you'll hear the haukainga mihi the two papaku every time they speak, when you're the voice for that mate to welcome their manuhiri. And your focus should be acknowledging the manuhiri and acknowledging their mate that they bring to this mate. Hoi anō, things have changed and it's a bit different, but oh well. Not what I was taught and not what I do. Others won't do the karakia until later on after all of the speeches or until that evening. And it just depends on which marae you're at, whatever. The key thing, though, is once all the speeches are finished and the manuhiri come around to hariru, once the manuhiri have finished, then the pai will normally go up and hariru the wānau pani. And just because they don't need to get up, you go to them. And it may be different in some tribes, so just noting that, but most places I've been to, I've seen that most people do the same as what we do, which is once the line is finished of the manuhiri for the first tope that brings on the two papaku, as a pai, we then go, as a haukainga, we all go and hariru that mate. And if they arrive in the afternoon, early evening, you just work it out. You might have talked to your cooks and you just say, okay, let's just get this all done at once. And then you have evening karakia, then you go for a kai, or you go and have kai and then you wait however long before you have evening karakia. You just have to work at it depending on the context and what time everything finishes. And if you do wait and then you have evening karakia, if you're going to have 3 nights of kōrero, usually that first night of kōrero is short, but it's the kōrero, it's the time I always will lay down the wakapapa of the person and how they connect to the marae, or how they connect to the people, especially if you've tono for that body and they might not be from that marae. If they're not from that marae, if they're an in-law or somebody that's been really close, but you tono and you win the tono and they come to your marae, that's when you use the phrase e te taonga o te mate. I was always taught that you don't call every tūpāpaku te taonga o te mate, especially if they're from there, because you're just blowing about yourself and calling yourself a taonga. But if they're an in-law or not from that marae, that's when you acknowledge them as a taonga, because you have the honour of caring for them. Therefore, they become the taonga of the people of that marae, that hapu. And so, that's the first day, night, finish off karakia, and then you rest up. It's also really good to make sure that by the time you've got to the marae, you've finalised, you've worked out with relations and all of that, you've finalised what's happening and what the funeral date is, so that you can then work with a minister, work with the paipai, work with the Māori wardens or the local police, especially if there's tricky intersections, so that you start organising all of that for the funeral service. There's a question coming up that around COVID. And so, it's new times, and the 3-day funeral was as a result of the influenza and different pandemics that hit us. And so we had to change to 3 days because we'd keep our bodies for weeks. And even though it stunk from a Western perspective, we were so used to that, te piro or te mate, it wasn't that bad for us. Plus, the pare kawakawa, the mai, the greenery around your hair, that was all part of warding off the odours, and would also give you a poultice, as I said, might have been in the last one. But things have changed. We also have Zooms and all of that, and live streaming. I think the most important thing is that the pani, the whānau pani, the family, and the paipai have to work out what works for you guys. Because if you're going to Zoom people in, then they should at least be given a mihi of sorts, so that they don't just haere pukano, just come and, higuru piguri. You should still acknowledge that they're coming to grieve, rather than, oh, come on, and you just start showing your phone on the tūpāpaku and kia ora. Try and work with the pai as to how you want to do it, especially for the first time. Any time after that, if it's the same group, then you might not need to mihi them. And a good thing, though, is to bring people in for karakia and for when they come on and the final funeral service. So there's a whole range of different things that you've got to work through. But the most important thing, you're home now, confirm the funeral date if you hadn't already, and then we can then work out all of the kaimahi. One final thing is, if you have a massive family, you have to work out who will be the pani and who will stay by the tūpāpaku, because you can't chop and change when you're hohao, when you want to just have a break. You should identify those people that will be the pani, those people that will sit on the pai, and the rest go and help. Go and help the marae, because most marae these days struggle. And you just work all of that out. Final thing, there's some questions around decolonising burials, being buried flat, caskets, harakeke. And so I'm pro tōpaki, wakatu pāpaku myself. That's the woven vessels. Neki, e tōpaki or wakatu pāpaku. There's a few names for them. One, because they're natural. Two, because I don't want to be embalmed because it just injects poison into the land. But three, it's just quite lovely, because you go to tangi like that, and even when we close at midnight the night before the burial, and so even then you can still put your arm over your loved one once they've been closed up, and it's just lovely. And it's not as cold when you're putting the dirt on a box and you hear that clunk, clunk. So, you know, traditionally, tu pāpaku is to stand, you know, go back into your fetal position. And that's how they would wrap the bodies. You know, we've got to relearn how to do all of that stuff if we want to go back that way. And then you just need to make sure you've got a good kicker. So a kicker is the person who goes out from the haukainga to explain to the manuhiri, especially if things are different. Like if you've wrapped the body up the old way, so that they're in the fetal position, you just let them know so that they don't get ke kore ai rā te oho, so that they don't get a fright or anything, just because it's different. So yeah, kātiaki, I thought I'd be slow, but I went a long time again. Well, not. Hope this is helpful. And I think the key thing is we've got to be practical with COVID. A lot of people, when you are in a COVID situation, they won't hariru, walk past and you just nod to each other, kia ora, kia ora, kia ora. And you've got to work that out. You've got to be sensible, and just find ways that you can express aroha and help each other grieve in a safe way. Kātiake, kia hokaere ake nei kupu, ki te tāhuhu nui o rangi nui e tui o nei, e rongo o kaere ake ki runga ai, turuturu o iti o ka maua kia tīna, hui e, taiki e kia tātou, take care, see you next Tuesday.